Buonasera a tutti, grazie di essere venuti qui oggi alla Dante Alighieri. Come ogni ultimo venerdì del mese noi abbiamo questi eventi culturali e oggi è con grande piacere che abbiamo qui con noi un ospite illustre del Western Australia e dell'Australia, che è il professor John Kinder. Veramente siamo molto felici. Siamo felici perché tra l'altro siamo anche in connessione con tutta l'Australia. Sono 10 Dante Alighieri sparsi nell'Australia, in questo momento sono collegati insieme a noi e sono collegati anche a Roma alla Dante Alighieri della sede centrale di Firenze. Quindi insomma siamo abbastanza internazionali oggi, quindi siamo molto felici. Come vedete ci sono un po' di telecamere, Facebook, insomma ci abbiamo messo un po', forse verrà tutto malissimo, però non fa niente. Insomma, linea di massima, la cosa importante è che il professor John Kinder oggi è qui e ci presenterà. Che cosa ci presenterà? Ci presenterà qualcosa che riguarda Dante Alighieri. D'altronde noi siamo la Dante Alighieri Society del WA, quindi è importante soprattutto quest'anno ricordarci di Dante Alighieri, del settecentenario della sua morte. Proprio per questo tutte le sedi australiane hanno organizzato degli eventi e questi eventi verranno portati, diciamo, da adesso in poi fino a novembre. Già adesso vi dirò, senza che ve lo dico dopo, che il professor John Kinder sarà di nuovo protagonista a settembre, l'ultimo venerdì di settembre e l'ultimo venerdì di ottobre, e avremo due celebrità italiane, uno storico importante, il professor Alessandro Barbero, e che non presenterà il suo libro, avrà una discussione con John Kinder, e il mese dopo il professor Luca Sommi dell'Università di Padova, che presenterà il suo libro, e avrà una discussione, un dialogo con sempre il professor John Kinder, e presenterà il suo libro Nel mezzo del cammino di nostra vita, sempre riguardante la Divina Commedia. Insomma, di Dante ne abbiamo fino a fine anno, quindi adesso me ne vado e lascio la parola. Ovviamente spero che facciate un grande applauso al professor John Kinder. Grazie.
Buonasera a tutti. Kaya Wanju, nang Kadich Nija Wajuk Nunga Buja Ngalakuri. It's a very great pleasure to be here this evening. I'm grateful to the Dante Society of Western Australia and the Dante Society of Canberra for this invitation to be part of this extraordinary national event celebrating the 700th anniversary of the death of Dante Alighieri, who was born in 1265 and died in 1321, so 700 years. And Italy's gone Dante mad, it seems, this year to celebrate the 700 years. But Australia is one of those countries in the world which is joining in the celebrations. I enjoyed very much last month's talk by Paolo Totaro from New South Wales, with his beautiful reflection on his long and rich life. And I appreciated his recommendation from Paolo to take the Divine Comedy and other Italian classics to the homes where elderly Italians in Australia are living, to help them reconnect to memories that they have from their childhood. That was a very beautiful suggestion. Tonight I'm looking at the other end of the life cycle, let's say, and the question I'm asking myself tonight is how to offer Dante to young generations of Australians today, whether they're of Italian background or not. It's not a neutral question, because I know that actually Dante is extremely interesting and appealing to young Australians. But the question, I suppose, is why, and how do we teachers offer Dante in such a way that it's going to connect with young West Australians on this side of the world 700 years later. Is everything okay for sound and all that kind of stuff? Is it? I can keep going? I'll carry on unless I'm asked. So, let me say that I'm not a Dante specialist by any stretch of the imagination. I did my honours dissertation when I was a young bloke on Dante's Purgatory, but then I took other paths, and About 8 years ago, we found ourselves at the University of Western Australia with no one to teach Dante because the people who had taught him had left the university. And I remembered the impact it had on me as a 20-year-old to read Dante for the first time. And I remember too how Dante has remained for me a kind of travelling companion through life in various ways. And I thought it's important that young people in Western Australia have the opportunity to read Dante, in Italian if possible, but just to read him, And so I gave it a go. And so tonight I'm reflecting on the experience of those 7 or 8 years teaching Dante and the things that I've learned. One thing I've learned is that young people approach Dante today in ways that are very, very different from the ways that I approached Dante, say, 40 years ago when I studied him. Their ways of approaching Dante are not mine. I don't want to do the things that they do. I don't want to be on their social media platforms. Never mind, I have to find their ways interesting because I'm trying to connect with their ways of approaching things. And another experience of recent years is that I've become increasingly frustrated with only teaching the Inferno. So there are students of mine in the room here tonight, and they know that you get to the end of a course of Dante and you're kind of in the bottom of hell. Well, it's not strictly true, but in more ways than one. Yeah. But I mean, the last few lines of the Inferno he manages to squeeze out, and the very last line, of course, he comes out and sees the stars again. But that's about it, really. So I just became frustrated that the students might leave my courses thinking that Dante was the guy that wrote the Inferno. He didn't. He wrote the Divine Comedy. And there are 3 parts of it: Inferno, Purgatory, and Paradiso. And if you don't read the whole thing, you don't get the big picture. And if you don't get the big picture, you can't understand the details. Even the details of Inferno don't make full sense if you're not aware of the context that you're in. Because any detail in life only makes sense within a whole that it belongs to, right? So I'm going to talk to you tonight about 2 things that have come out of this thinking of mine from teaching. One is how important it is to get the big picture of Dante, not just his Inferno, but the whole thing. And secondly, what the big picture of Dante actually is. What's the Divine Comedy all about? So I'll let you know a secret. As I'm talking to you tonight, I've decided next semester to teach the entire Divine Comedy in 10 weeks. Call it my folle volo, as Dante would say. So as I'm talking it through with you now, I'm kind of convincing myself that it was actually a good idea, because it starts in about 4 weeks' time. So in the talk tonight, I'm going to range over the entire comedy, looking at bits from all over the place. And I've decided to show you quite a few pictures. And the pictures I'm going to show are illustrations of the comedy. And I've decided to take a selection from different time periods, different artists, different countries, to remind us of how universal the appeal of Dante is. Now, here's something that turned up in my course on the Inferno last year. It's a meme. You know memes, even the old people in the room know what memes. Combination of picture and words. Now, the students had to give a presentation every week, and in the presentations, one pair of students introduced a meme, and then it kind of became a competition to see who could find the most outrageous Dante memes. There are some outrageous Dante memes out there. So here we have a meme put up by Amy. When you show the class a Dante meme but no one gets it. Now it went up and there was a lot of laughs around the room, and I asked the class, does anyone know what the picture actually is of? It's obviously, can I point? Here we are. It's obviously, there's Dante, the younger of the 2, there's his guide Virgil. Virgil's pointing to this person here. This person here, the sinner here, whose belly has been slit open and his entrails are all spilling out between his knees, is Muhammad, the Prophet of Islam. And the class had the same reaction you just had. Oh. And I could hear them thinking, perhaps we shouldn't have laughed quite so loud. Here's the Prophet of Islam, reduced to this grotesque and repellent feature. So there was an awkward silence in the class, and I think awkward silences are actually very good things, because out of awkward silences comes some just conversation and clarification. And we talked about Dante and Islam in the context of the clash of civilizations, which I put in the title of the talk tonight. But I hope you saw the inverted commas around the phrase clash of civilizations. I don't think there's been a clash of civilizations since September 11, 2001. But it's a phrase which is around. Yeah? It's a phrase which is around. So, and we talked in the class about what do we do about the fact that one of the greatest work of Italian literature has put the Prophet of Islam in that kind of situation. What do you do about that? How do you respond to that? One response came out earlier this year. In March of this year, a new translation of the Inferno appeared in Dutch. So a new Dutch translation of the Inferno. And in Canto 28, where this passage occurs, the name of the Prophet, there's a description of it all, but the name has been cancelled. And the translator said she did it deliberately so as not to cause unnecessary offence. Now, that's a response. There are other responses to the presence of Muhammad in the Inferno. Let's have a look a bit more closely at Muhammad and why he's in hell. This is an even more grotesque painting. Can you all see through me on this side of the room? This is by the Sicilian painter Renato Guttuso from the late 20th century. It shows the schismatics. See, Muhammad is not condemned to hell because he believed in a false religion or even because he founded a false religion. Dante believed that Muhammad had taken elements of Christianity, and there are many elements of Christianity in Islam. Jesus is mentioned, Mary, Abraham, and he mixed them with other things. And so he perverted Christianity and created a division in Christendom worldwide. He'd split the world into Christians and Muslims. And so this part of hell where he's punished is a place for people who split societies or religions or families or states, the sowers of discord or the schismatics. Their punishment is that they walk around this place chased by demons with very sharp swords. And the demons go around and hack bits off these sinners. Why? Because in their lives, they hack bits off society. They split society in two. So they're being split in two. So this poor fellow down the bottom here, you see, has lost a leg. This chap has lost an arm. And here, this is very famous Bertrand de Born, figure from the 15th century. He's had his head chopped off and he's wandering around holding his head up like a lantern. And here in the middle, this person with dark skin, he's been split open from below the neck down to the groin, and all his innards are hanging up, is Muhammad. This chap over here in the top left is probably Muhammad's son-in-law, Ali, who's mentioned in the canto, and his face has been split down the middle. Ali was involved in the split between the Sunni and the Shia denominations of Islam. So Dante the Islamophobe, perhaps. And many of our students might be forgiven for jumping to that conclusion. This is where the big picture comes in. There are other Muslims in the comedy. They're all in hell, the other three of them, but they're all in limbo. Now, this map of hell by Botticelli shows the 9 circles of hell. The limbo is the first circle of hell. Limbo is an old word that means the edge, or the rim, or the hem of something. And so the limbo is this first circle where people aren't actually punished. Dante says, without hope, they live in desire. And limbo was an idea developed by the Catholic Church in a century or two before Dante for 2 categories of people. One was unbaptized infants, so babies who were born before they were baptized, and the holy people of the holy individuals of the Jewish people. The great Jewish people were there until the resurrection of Jesus, where Jesus went into limbo, he went into hell, collected the best of the Jewish people and took them up to paradise. And so when Dante flies through paradise, at one stage he actually meets Adam. So here you can see Dante kneeling with Beatrice behind him, and the first of those figures with a fig leaf is Adam. So Adam was taken out of limbo into paradise. When Dante creates his own limbo, he does something completely outside church teaching. Because there are unbaptized babies, there are Jewish people, but he adds pagans. Pagans from Greece and pagans from Rome. Some of them lived before the time of Jesus, some of them lived after the time of Jesus. This is not official church teaching. Inside the circle of limbo, there's an even more special place. Set off to one side, there's the noble castle. You can see the sort of pinkish castle there. There are 7 walls, so it's very difficult to get in. 7 moats and so on. It's set away in a quiet corner, protected by the walls. Inside there's green grass, running brooks, bright sunlight. You'd hardly know you're in hell, really. And this beautiful place is reserved for the ancient philosophers and poets, the best of the pagan philosophers. So Dante meets Aristotle and Plato and all the others. He meets Ptolemy, Ovid, Seneca and so on. And he meets 3 Muslims. So Dante's not only put pagans from Rome and Greece into the noble castle, he's put 3 Muslims. He put the great scholars Avicenna and Averroes, who wrote commentaries on Aristotle. And at the very left-hand side here, we can see that the last of the Muslims, the Saladin, Salahuddin. Let's see if we can see him up close. There he is. And you can see his name in this manuscript here. Now, the Saladin was the Sultan of Egypt. He was the leader of the Muslim armies who defeated the Christian Crusaders in the Third Crusade and recaptured Jerusalem and made Jerusalem a Muslim city. An enemy of Christianity. And here he is, Dante's put him in limbo. Because the Saladin had a great reputation as a man of honour, of integrity, and was someone who respected his opponents. So you can see that just looking at Muhammad and that grotesque punishment there gives us one side of things. There's a lot more to Dante's vision of Islam and Christianity. Let's stay in hell for a bit longer. We'll get out soon enough, but we'll stay there for a wee bit longer to look at 2 sins that Dante punishes that cause quite a bit of trouble to modern students. And my students in the back row can confirm whether this is true or not. The 2 sins are suicide and sodomy. They're punished by Dante, and these cause some difficulty for young West Australian students. So here back into Botticelli's hell. Suicide is punished in lower hell. So the lower hell kind of begins about halfway down, and then things get pretty grim down there. Dante considers suicide to be an act of violence against oneself and a rejection of the gifts of God. And so the punishment for those who die by suicide is this illustration by William Blake, is that the souls of those who die by suicide are turned into trees. You can see a face on this one, sort of a face on this one. Why? Because in life they separated their body from their soul. Their punishment is for their soul to be separated from their real body and to be given a new body, which is just a plant, a tree. At the Last Judgment, they will be allowed to go and collect their real bodies and bring them back. But then their bodies will be draped over the branches of their trees. They will be forever separated, body and soul, just as they were in life. So there's an extraordinary picture that Dante creates of this forest of trees with no leaves, and after the Last Judgment, all these bodies draped over their branches. Now, as we look at this, we remember that for many centuries the Church refused to bury those who died by suicide in consecrated ground. And we recoil now at that coldness of heart. But Dante encounters many people who died by suicide in other parts of the comedy as well. They're not all here. Back in Limbo, he met Seneca, the Roman. In the circle of the lustful, he meets Dido and Cleopatra, who both did themselves in for love. And most extraordinary of all, when he comes out of hell and lands on the shores or at the foot of Mount Purgatory, he meets the guardian of the mountain. Now this picture here from Doré's very famous pictures, we see Dante kneeling, his guide Virgil, we see the 4 stars in the sky, and not the Southern Cross. But maybe. And he meets the guardian. Now, purgatory is an exquisitely Catholic invention. No other Christian denomination has that idea. No other religion has the concept of purgatory. And yet, the guardian of this very Christian and Catholic space, purgatory, is Cato the Younger. That's who this chap is, Cato the Younger. A pagan Roman who died by suicide. So rather than submit to the tyranny of Julius Caesar, he did the honourable thing and took his own life. So Dante chooses to overlook his suicide and celebrate his great love of freedom. So I hope that even in these 2 examples so far, you can see that Dante is faithful to the doctrine, but he's interpreting it his own way. One more. A little lower than suicide is the circle where the sin of sodomy is punished. Now, Dante works way outside our usual ways of thinking because he puts 3 categories of acts together in the same circle. He calls them all violence against God. One is blasphemy, one is sodomy, and one is usury, lending money for excess profit. Blasphemy is obviously violence against the name of God. Sodomy is a sin against nature, and nature descends from God. And usury is a sin against human ingenuity and skill, which descends from God. The souls of those punished for these 3 sins are punished forever in a sterile, sandy desert under a rain of fire, straight from Sodom and Gomorrah in the Old Testament. Dante is shocked, as we can see. Dante's in red here. He's shocked when he recognizes his old teacher, Brunetto Latini, but he can hardly recognize him. His face is so disfigured and burnt by the fire. So, Dante the Islamophobe, now we've got Dante the homophobe. Well, we need to just suspend our judgment and get the big picture to see exactly how Dante feels about these things. Let's take a look, to understand this better, let's take a look at how Dante punishes the sin of lust. Now, I might just whiz back for a second to this is the map of hell. The sins get worse as they go down, right? And one of the things that endeared me to Dante straight away when I was a young bloke who did this for the first time was that lust is at the top of the hell. It's the least important of all the sins. So for a young fellow who'd come through the Catholic school system and was struggling with a number of things, this was a very refreshing outlook. And so let me go back to where I was. So in the second circle of hell, the first circle is limbo, the second circle is the circle of the lustful. Dante meets many, many people, and everyone remembers his encounter with Paolo and Francesca. Seen here, this particularly languid and sumptuous 19th century vision. Francesca was married to a chap and had an affair with the husband's brother, whose name was Paolo, on the screen. They were discovered by the husband, who put them both to death. You can see the sword wound on Paolo's chest and on Francesca's back. They are united forever in love and in punishment. And you can see here Dante looking very, very serious and thoughtful about this. He's about to faint, like a dead body. Peccati come corpo morto cade, he says. There are also lustful souls in purgatory. Now, here we see Dante and the three parts of his poem. We see hell over on the bottom left, we see Mount Purgatory, and then heavens all around. Now, Mount Purgatory has 7 circles behind that gate, and they are where the 7 deadly sins are punished. From the worst one at the bottom to the least important at the top. The worst deadly sin is pride. That's what Adam and Eve had, made them eat the apple. And the least important, you'll be relieved to know, is lust. Now remember, all the souls in purgatory have been saved. They're suffering, but they've been saved. They are going to heaven. See, at the end of the world, when space and time cease to exist, there will only be 2 states of being. There will be being with God, that's called heaven. There will be being without God, that's called hell. Purgatory will no longer exist. But for now, these people are purging themselves, purgatory. They're purging themselves, not of the sin, because that's been forgiven. They're purging themselves on the memory of the sin and of the evil effects that sin has had on their souls. Now, at the top of Mount Purgatory, you can see there's a ring of fire that separates the 7 levels of the deadly sins from the very top, which is the earthly paradise, a kind of Garden of Eden. You can see Adam and Eve. Now, the ring of fire is where the lustful are punished. Well, being purged, let's say. Now, fire, of course, is a symbol of lust, but fire is also a great purifier. So they've been purified in the fire as well. Now, Dante notices that the lustful who are running through the fire, around and around and around the mountain, are in 2 groups. And the 2 groups are running in opposite directions. One group is running from east to west, the way the sun goes, and they are heterosexual. The other group running from west to east, which is against the direction of the sun, they sinned against nature, and they are homosexual. So Dante seems to have no problem in placing heterosexual love and homosexual love in the same circle of the lustful. In fact, when 2 groups meet as they run around the circle, they stop and greet each other with a kiss. Not a kiss of passion, of course, but a kiss of chaste Christian charity. Here you can see another more modern version of the same scene where Dante's recognised someone. So, what did Dante think about sexuality, heterosexual or homosexual? Well, it's not a simple answer, a simple question to answer, and I can't go into that now, but it's clear that Dante is alive to the complexity of human experience. But the point I want to make so far then, looking at the case of limbo and the case of these 2 sins, is that things are not as simple as they seem. If you just read Inferno, you risk coming away with a black and white, 2-dimensional view of Dante, which I believe is a long way from the truth. Dante's pushing boundaries. He's exploring the beliefs he holds, the beliefs that give shape to his life. He's trying to get to the heart of things, to find the deep reasons for judging virtue and vice, goodness and badness, salvation and condemnation. Above all, it seems to me, Dante is free. He's free in the way that he applies his beliefs to human experience. And this is one of the things that makes him most attractive, I think, to modern readers. his freedom. And yet at the same time, his worldview is fundamentally and profoundly religious. The religious sense is at the foundation of his understanding of everything and penetrates every aspect of his experience. And this is where he becomes really fascinating, because he challenges, seems to be, Dante challenges many of the basic ideas that we modern people have in making sense of reality. He seems to live quite happily with contradictions that are different from our contradictions. He believes in ultimate truth, in good and bad, and yet you can see how he's bent the rules. He submits to the authority of spiritual leaders and puts popes in hell. He just seems to defy our expectations all the time. Now, Dante is not interested in the comedy in proving his worldview or justifying his faith or even explaining it. He wants to explore it, to see how to make sense of everything. He's searching for ways for humans to live in peace with themselves and peace with each other. He lived at a fascinating time in European history. There were gigantic struggles going on between religious authority and secular power, popes and emperors and so on. Just a generation before Dante, St. Thomas Aquinas had written his great Summa Theologica, which gave Christians new, sophisticated ways of applying their faith to the world. And in Paradise, Dante meets Thomas Aquinas. And he is flying through the air with Beatrice, and he meets Thomas, and I think that's St. Albert the Great there. And other fathers of the church are seated with the books that they wrote. Other influential thinkers of the time were from the orders of preachers who were transforming the way Europeans thought about their society. Dominicans like Aquinas or Franciscans like Duns Scotus. And here we can see a scene in Paradise again, where this is St. Thomas Aquinas, horizontal. He's introducing St. Francis of Assisi and St. Dominic to Dante. So Dante's encountering the great thinkers of his time. So these guys were the most important teachers in Europe at the time. Dante read them all, he goes to Paradise and meets them all. What's most striking about Dante, and here I'm coming now to his big picture and what's in the big picture, is that Dante takes his beliefs, louder, Dante takes his beliefs, he takes his knowledge of philosophy and theology and politics and economics and physics and astronomy and basically everything else, and his own experience. He takes his beliefs and his knowledge and his experience and he integrates everything into one single system, one unified vision of the world, where everything hangs together. This, I think, is particularly provocative to young students these days because they're growing up in a world which has rejected the grand narratives, the theories of everything, the total explanations. And yet Dante claims that there is a way of seeing the world where everything can fit. What do I mean? Well, the most common geometric figure in the comedy is the circle. For one thing, Dante is always moving in circles. He hardly ever moves in a straight line. So in Hell, here's this beautiful map of Hell by a Dutch artist, also known as Giovanni Stradana. You can see that the circles of Hell get smaller as they go down, and he's walking around the edge, obviously, so he's always walking in circles. Tremendous feeling of claustrophobia in this map. I think it's fantastic. He always moves clockwise in Hell, because if you're facing the centre of a circle and you have to go clockwise, the first step you take is with your left foot, your piede sinistro, the bad foot, with apologies to all the lefties in the room, that's the bad side. When he comes to Purgatory, he moves anti-clockwise, because his first step is with his right foot. In Heaven, he's always moving in circles, and the heavens, the 9 heavens, are always moving. And let me say here that Dante's heaven is an extraordinary place. It's a place of movement, it's a place of colour, it's a place of song, There are no old men with white, well, there are a few old men with white beards, but they're not sitting around on clouds playing harps. It's a place of movement and joy and participation. One way of understanding how Dante manages to make everything make sense is to think about a word that Dante didn't know. There's a word that we use in English and a word we use in Italian, the same word. But Dante didn't know because the word comes from Greek. And Italians at this stage didn't know ancient Greek. They hadn't rediscovered it yet. It's a Greek word that means order or regularity. And for the ancient Greeks, when things were in the right order and regular and symmetrical, then they were beautiful. So this word means order and regularity. It also means adornment, or things that make people beautiful. And that word is cosmos. Now, when we think of the cosmos now, we think of a big space without limit, without colour, without soul, without life. Cold, black, endless space. The word means a beautiful place that is structured in an orderly fashion. That's what it means. And the ancient Greeks said the word cosmetic comes from here, because things that are ordered and regular are beautiful. So cosmetics make you beautiful. See how it's connected. This is the kind of thinking, Dante didn't know the word, but it's the kind of thinking that Dante has, that the world hangs together. It's been created by an intelligent creator. Let's be clear here, this is no escapist dream world that Dante's getting into. Let's remember, he lived around 1300, it's a long time ago. And you don't have to read much about the medieval time to realise that medieval people experienced a lot more of life than we do. They're exposed to stuff that we are pretty well protected from these days. Sickness, pain, and death didn't happen in institutions. They happened in your house or next door. They were in your eyes and your ears and your nose all the time. Punishments inflicted on criminals were brutal and public. The world was a tough place. So when Dante's creating a system, a vision where everything makes sense and hangs together, he's not escaping from into some dream place. He's facing the harsh realities that he knew better than us. So what is this vision of reality? What's inside Dante's circle? At the center of Dante's view of things, at the center of reality, at the center of the universe, what ties everything together is love. God is love, says the New Testament. Love and freedom. What connects me to reality, to myself, to God, is love. Love and freedom. You can't have one without the other. You can't have love without freedom. And you can't have true freedom without love. And Dante spells this out very clearly at the center of his poem. You know, I suppose, that there are 100 cantos. The whole Divine Comedy is divided into 100 chapters called cantos. There are 33 in Inferno, 33 in Purgatory, 33 in Paradise, and one introduction makes 100. Now, the halfway point of the 100 comes in the middle of Purgatory. If you do your maths, 1 plus 33 is 34, 16, so the halfway point is between cantos 16 and 17. So, in cantos 17 and 18, Dante stops his journey up the mountain. He has a long reflection on love and freedom. The center of the poem, the center of reality. He says, the Christian understanding of God is a mysterious community of three persons, the Trinity, who are bound together in infinite freedom by mutual love. So the substance of being itself is revealed to us as relationship. Now, all the things God has created, all created things, are created with a primal, fundamental force of attraction within them. Every created thing is attracted to what is right and proper for it. This is love. So Dante says, fire obviously loves high air, because fire burns upwards. Heavy objects obviously love the earth, because they fall to the ground. Human beings, we are naturally attracted to what satisfies our desires. That's not good, it's not bad, it's just the way it is. Like plants produce green leaves, he says, bees make honey, human beings are attracted to what satisfies their desires. So, at the heart of Dante's vision is the human person with desire and freedom. He says, every person in a confused way becomes aware of some good thing in which the mind may find its peace, and they desire it. The person then strives to reach it. That's the story of our lives, seeking that which will fulfill our desires. We are hardwired to desire. We would say, that's not Dante's words, but we would say we are hardwired to desire. It's in our DNA to desire the same things. We all desire fundamentally the same things. We desire goodness, beauty, love, truth, happiness, justice. However we think they look, we all desire those things. Question, how do we recognize what really is good and beautiful and just? Well, Dante says, the same God who is love, the same God who gave us freedom, has also given us with something extraordinary that he gave no other level of creation, the power of reason. This is what makes us human. This is what we're responsible for, the way we use our reason to direct our desires. Reason is what makes us human. To see how important this is, let's go back to lust again, if you just let me. Back to the circle of lust, and here's the most famous, probably, painting of Paolo Francesca by Gustave Doré. Dante actually says why the sinners are condemned in this circle. They're not there because they broke a law. They went against some moral code. They broke one of the 10 Commandments. They're all important, but they are not the heart of the matter. Dante puts it very succinctly in line 33 of Canto 5. I peccatori carnali, he calls them, che la ragion sommettono al talento. These people are carnal sinners who make reason subject to desire. That's why they've been punished. Not because of what they did, but in doing what they did, they subjected their reason to desire. Reason is the highest gift we have. We should use our reason to direct our desires, to discern what's truly worthy of our desires, worthy of our status as humans. If we let our reason follow our desire instead of vice versa, then we deserve to be there. So reason for Dante is the ability to grasp the truth of myself and my relationship with the world. Now, the most obvious thing I know about myself, if I look at myself simply and honestly, the clearest thing I know about myself in this moment is that I am not making myself. I'm not giving myself being. I owe my existence to something other than myself. And so in some way I depend on this mysterious other, which gave me life and is giving me life in this moment. Heaven is the place where people go when they have lived their desires authentically, when they have lived their desires in harmony with the one who gave them life. Hell is the place for those who lived perverted desires, those who didn't desire the right things enough, or those who desired the wrong things. And when we say the wrong things, again, it's not wrong according to some moral code, it's wrong according to the nature that we have. So it's easy to see how reason is important in hell and purgatory, because this helps Dante understand why certain sins are sins and what are worse sins than others and how to punish them. But the astonishing thing is that as he flies through paradise and gets closer and closer to the vision of God, which is going to satisfy all his desires don't diminish, they intensify. You might expect that his desires would kind of fade away and he'll just sort of rest into God. On the contrary, his ideas become inflamed the closer he gets, and his reason becomes sharper. As he flies through paradise, his desire to understand, to be happy, to be useful for himself in the world becomes intense. And there's a beautiful moment where you can see this, almost at the top, where he stops. There's Dante in blue in this illustration. He stops and turns back and looks back where he's come from. He sees all created universe at his feet. He sees all the heavens, all the stars, all the planets, and way off in the distance he sees the center of the universe, which is the Earth. And as he sees the Earth, a bit like those astronauts, you know, those astronauts who look back and look at this tiny dot. Dante does the same. He sees the Earth and he realizes how small it is and how much we humans have abused the gifts we have. And with a mixture of affection and regret, he describes the Earth as this patch of earth that makes us so fierce. I can't remember the Italian. Questa aiuola che ci fa così feroci. This patch of earth that makes us so fierce. Great affection for the planet, but great regret that we haven't used the gifts we have for better purposes on this planet of ours. So I think this is what really fascinates young students. This vision of belief that sees at the center of everything freedom and love, all guided by reason. So I'll finish on that note now, just to say that Dante is so sure of himself. He's so certain in his beliefs and understandings that he's able to face everything. He can face himself, he can face his own faults and failings, his own fears, he can face his own doubts. I think today we've become suspicious of certainty, haven't we? Someone's too certain of their ideas, we are afraid that the certainty might spill over into fanaticism or fundamentalism. But a fanatic or a fundamentalist is not free, or not even certain. You can tell by their white knuckles that they're gripping on to their certainties. Dante's free. He's so free, he's relaxed. This all made sense to me when I read this. I apologise for the length of this, but this is from a late 20th century writer, and it seems to me to just capture this relationship in Dante between his certainty and his doubt. It says, both the believer and the unbeliever today share doubt and belief, each in their own way. Neither can quite escape either doubt or belief. So if you see yourself as a believer, or if you see yourself as an unbeliever, whatever it is, you can't avoid facing issues of doubt and belief. The writer says we are destined to find our own sense of our existence only in this unceasing rivalry between doubt and belief. Perhaps in this way, he says, doubt, which saves both sides from being shut up in their own worlds, could become the avenue of communication. That's an interesting idea. It prevents both from enjoying complete satisfaction. It opens up the believer to the doubter and the doubter to the believer. That's why all three parts of the poem, hell, purgatory, and paradise, end with the same word, the word stella, the word stars. Here are the last line of Inferno, the last line of Purgatory, the last line of Paradise. They all end with the word stars. Because the whole story of the Divine Comedy is about me and my relationship with the stars, with my ultimate destiny. Everything I am and everything I do seems to die away in my hands. But everything I do has to do with the stars, Dante says. They are my ultimate destiny. So this amazing story of Dante's might sound like an escape into an amazing, breathtaking world where everything makes sense. It's all beautifully structured. It's a safe space. It's not a safe space. It's a place where you're encouraged to take risks. To take risks in either believing or doubting or both. So Dante's comedy is not an escape, it's a window. It's a frame. It's another dimension of this world, not just the other world. We read Dante and we can never look at ourselves or our personal circumstances in the same way ever again. That's the gift of a great work of art.
Grazie. Thank you. Thanks for everyone. Thanks for John Kinder. It's been a really pleasure to hear from you. And so now what we have our raffle tickets. Okay. I don't know. Maybe if you have questions, se avete domande da fare, if you have questions, yeah. One question.
Frank.
John, if Durante were to come back today, what would he write?
Wouldn't it be the same thing?
I wasn't expecting that question. Well, it might be more difficult to write today because we don't share his belief that there is a grand narrative, a system that can understand it. But I think he would probably write the same thing. In fact, there are a number of writers in the last 20 or 30 years who've rewritten Dante. And my students have access to these. An American black writer has written the story of a city in the Midwest, which is a semicircular city, and these drug dealers have to get their way to the centre, and that each suburb is one of Dante's circles of hell. Just one example. So this attempt of Dante to create a system that makes sense is foreign to us in our modern, postmodern world, but it's familiar as well. And the fact that people keep coming back to it suggests to me that there's something in us that needs and wants and believes that that sort of explanation is possible. Yes?
You say that everybody takes risks, well, they do for gain. Taking risks is for gain. Individually or business-wise or company-wise?
So the question is, people take risks but they do it for personal gain. That will probably get you in hell. If that's your only motivation for taking risks. Nothing personal. But that's part of Dante's journey. When Dante begins to climb Mount Purgatory, he's weighed down and the climb is tough and it's hard. And the angel who's guarding the gate carves the letter P 7 times in his forehead. P for peccatum, sin. There are 7 levels, so 7 P. And each time he goes through one of the levels, one of the P's disappears. And he finds the climb easier and easier, and lighter and lighter. So finally, when he gets to the earthly paradise, he's free then to fly. And so I think that's when there's a message there where the more one can die to self, and the more one can find the motivation to risk for no gain or for the benefit of others, the easier we'll find the climb.
As you say, you take risk and you fail. What happens there?
Well, Dante was a man of action. I mean, he wasn't a guy who sat and, meditated and he was a politician, and he was expelled from Florence because he was caught up in a corruption scandal. So he knew all about failure and all about trying again. And I think he would agree that the aim of life is not to avoid falling, it's to find the courage to keep risking.
The results.
The results may come or they may not. But what's important to Dante is for him to find the inner motivation to take the risk. Then what happens is out of his control. Yes.
So it's clearly all related to love and freedom.
Mm-hmm.
And it appears that the vision of freedom is the Catholic vision of freedom. So it's the ability to do the right thing,
Yes.
to do the right choices. What do you think about love instead? Is there a unique vision, or there is different visions of love?
One thing I think Dante is not is moralistic. So he's not interested at any stage in telling people what the rules are and what the official doctrine is. He's interested in going to the heart of. He believes the doctrines, but that's easy. To repeat doctrines is easy, but it's more difficult to go to the heart of the doctrine to discover the reason behind it. So the examples that I gave to do with love and sexuality, I think, suggest that Dante was a 14th century person. He didn't have a referendum on same-sex marriage as we have. It was a different place. But he's wrestling with the fact that human experience is complex, and we are all complex. In fact, the whole Divine Comedy begins where he's in a dark forest and he's lost his way, seriously lost his way. He thinks he's about to die. Now, we don't know exactly what that crisis was, probably spiritual, probably emotional, probably religious, for Dante, the real person. But he knows a lot about falling short of ideals. But because it seems to me that he is so certain, and he's so certain that love is the center, that certainty in love gives him the courage to face his own failings and to accept his own failings and to get back up and try again. I hope that's an answer to the question.
Yeah. So the ideal love is the center for sure, but the better part is how Francesca.
Well, we're not angels, you see. We have bodies and souls. And Dante is acutely aware of that. Are there questions?
Yeah. First of all, they say thank you, but I got many messages. Thank you, a fantastic presentation. Thank you for fascinating talk, blah, blah, blah. But one said, why the Inferno is the best, actually said, why Inferno is better than Purgatory and Heaven.
Okay, let's get this
To
straight.
read.
Inferno is not better than Purgatory. That's the answer to that question. Right. Like, there's lots of blood and guts, and I mean, it's really great. Like, there's a lot of, like, he has this amazing imagination for thinking up the punishments of of people. Like, well, not, you know, spoiler alert, but when he gets to the bottom, it's getting hotter, when he gets to the bottom of hell, he finds that the last circle of hell is for the worst sin in the whole universe. It's interesting. Ask a student, you know, what do you think the worst sin would be? Well, the worst sin for Dante is betrayal, treachery. There are two kinds of treachery. One treachery is treachery of people that you're not connected to. That's bad, but really bad. Worst of all is betraying people to whom you have an obligation. That is the worst sin in the world. And so Dante sees the devil has three mouths, three heads, and in the devil's three mouths are the three worst traitors that done in history. Judas Iscariot betrayed Jesus, Cassius and Brutus betrayed Julius Caesar. Now, the traitors, to betray someone who loves you, you've got to have a heart of ice. And their punishment? These people are buried forever in a lake of ice. Some underneath it, some of the heads sticking up, and he kicks them by mistake. So Inferno's great. I'm trying to remember now what the great English Dante scholar Dorothy Sayers, I think it was Dorothy Sayers or Barbara Reynolds, said that Purgatory is the least known of the three, the least studied, and the most loved. Purgatory. Paradise is just wild. It's just
Out of this world.
out of this world. It's just transcendent. Purgatory is for us though, because purgatory is the place where people have not got there yet. They're not going to hell, they are going to heaven, but they're not yet.
On their way.
They're filled with memory of the past and looking forward to the future. They're filled with fear for the memories of the past and hope for the future. That's why another reason why I decided not to just teach Inferno, because the other bits are, with all due respect, better. Any more questions?
No, only compliments.
Oh, that's very nice.
Many.
There were questions here, I think. Yes.
As a politician, he remains a politician, because the Divine Comedy, as I see it, is also an opportunity to condemn his enemies forever. And the whole Divine Comedy is full of that. To exile him was the worst punishment you could have experienced, especially the love he had for Florence. So, although he spoke of lofty things, at the same time, he was a man of combat, and he was a politician. And he had made enemies, and he hadn't forgiven his enemies. And I think the Divine Comedy shows that quite clearly in terms of where he places his enemies in the scheme of things.
That's very
Especially the
interesting.
number of people put in hell who were enemies of his.
Yeah, sure. Well, that's true. And we mustn't forget that in his time, a city wasn't just a city, it was actually a country. Like that's what you belonged to. And so being exiled, he was exiled on pain of death. If he returned to his city, he and his sons would be put to death. It would be like the government saying, you can't come back to Australia. Oh, sorry, I just said that. Moving on. We don't have a COVID discussion, do we? But that's what Dante endured for the rest of his life. Well, I think there are probably two ways of thinking about Dante's enemies. One is he's a bloke with a history. And he'd been treated very badly by a number of people, from Pope Boniface VIII all the way down, and he gives them what they deserve. But the other, it sounds a very human kind of. Although we must always remember too that there are many of his enemies. Even if they're in hell, he treats them with respect. Farinata degli Uberti, for example, in Canto 10, speaks to him rather contemptuously. Dante speaks to him with respect, calls him voi, doesn't call him tu. His sworn enemy, Ghibellino, calls him voi. The other part of the answer, though, I think, is that, again, see, Dante's looking for a way to make everything fit, to make everything make sense. And why should politics not fit there? And why should my relationship with you not fit? I think Dante would say, if there's some part of my life that doesn't fit into my system, then my system isn't worth it. I've got to find a different system. And so the things he's punished his enemies for are the things he punishes everyone for, using their reason in the wrong way.
We have a question. Can you comment on Dante's relationship with Virgil? Do we of the 21st century need a Virgil to find our way to freedom?
Gosh. Okay. Now, one of the important things about the comedy is this, that when, in the very first page, Dante's in this dark wood, the dark forest, he wakes up, he sees a mountain with the sun shining on the top. And he knows that that is where he is meant to be. That's where he's destined to be. That's where his happiness is. So he takes off and immediately gets blocked by the 3 wild beasts. So he comes back again and completely gives up hope. At that point, Virgil appears, the Roman poet. And Virgil says to Dante, you're right, that is your destination. But because you're a human being, because you're an adult and not a child, you can't take the easy way. You're going to get there, but you've got to go a different way, a harder way. And the way to climb that mountain is to start by going down. So the way to reach happiness outside yourself, Virgil says, is to go into yourself. So the first step of his journey is to go into hell, and then to climb Mount Purgatory, and then to go. And at no point in his journey is Dante ever alone. Ever. He's always accompanied. There are a few moments when he thinks he's alone and he's just filled with panic. Virgil takes him through all of hell and all of purgatory, but he can't go into the earthly paradise. Because Virgil was a pagan, a very good pagan. And so when Dante gets to the top of earthly paradise, Virgil disappears. He doesn't even say goodbye. He disappears and goes back to his place, which is in limbo. Now, Virgil, the greatest Roman poet, Dante thought, has the task of explaining along the way who these sinners are, why they're here, which is... Dante explains everything to him. And he is, as it were, a kind of voice of reason. He didn't have faith because he died before Jesus, or around that time. But he had reason to illuminate these things. I think Dante's answer to that question is we all need a companion, and we all need to follow, because at every point in the journey, Dante says, we saw such and such and such, and then I turned and I followed my God. That's the model.
Grazie, John. As you know, in Italy we start learning about Dante when we are 10, and if we end up learning about Italian literature, we never stop learning about it. The two aspects of the comedy that I've always found more fascinating is the contradiction between the Dante Viator, the traveler, and the Dante narrator, the storyteller, and they are two different persons in two different moments. And while the author is the one who creates this system where people are punished or forgiven or purging, the other ones actually they are the same person. He's very able to show empathy, and he's really he knows how to show what it is like to be human. And I've always found a great I was very fascinated by this contradiction, the two sides, the judging side, the system, the law, but also the ability to understand what it is like to be human with all the contradictions, and so to be close to even to the sinners, to the. But that was me many years ago. I wonder if we have to share this beauty with someone who belongs to a different generation to us and with a very different background, what do you think would be the best way to share these? You've been teaching recently to different generations and with students who have a very different background. So what do you think would be the best approach, the best hook to deliver that complexity and that beauty?
That's interesting because, see, the whole story is told in the first person, right? So it's Dante saying, I went there, I went there, I went there. But of course the person writing the story is a guy living in Italy in 1307. The person in the poem is a character who he's invented. And your question is about the relationship between the two. One of the fascinating things about the story is that it's obviously made up. But Dante insists over and over and over again that it really happened. I saw this, I heard it, I felt it, I fainted, I did this, I did that. And every now and again he turns to the reader and says, readers, pay attention to what's coming up. This is really important. Because this happened, this happened. He wants us to believe that he, the character, actually was there. Because if we don't believe that, then it's just a random story and we can make any meanings we like out of it. But if it actually did happen, which is what he wants us to believe, then we've got to be very careful how we interpret it. It's like the Bible, in fact. Without getting too carried away at this time, people in Europe believed the Bible, literally, and they believed that the Bible actually represented things in our life here. So when Dante arrives in Purgatory, all these sinners come in a boat and they're singing Psalm 110. It says, when Israel left Egypt, it was a day of great rejoicing. Now, Dante's saying that that's a true event. Israel did escape from bondage in Israel. It's a true fact. But that true fact, for me, means that I can be released from my bondage, whatever addictions and weaknesses I have. So I can relate the true stories of the Bible to the reality of my life. Dante says, take my book and read it the same way. Pretend it's true. Humour me. Pretend it's true. And then you can apply it to your own life.
Any questions?
Yeah.
John, you mentioned that there's, I think, students studying Dante now, and I think they're growing up in a world, a postmodern world that's rejected a grand narrative, arguably Christianity in the West. How and what sorts of things are they saying when they're being confronted with Catholic theology, especially not coming from that background? Let's say they've gone to a public school or they're not practicing Christian. What are they saying? How are they interpreting the text, and what things are they grappling with when reading the text?
Well, there are a couple of students in the back row I could get you to talk to them up with no names, no Pactual, but they're there. Look, most of my students, I think, would probably say that they do not share Dante's view of things. But I haven't asked them, it's none of my business in a sense, but my feeling is that they don't. And some have been openly hostile to it, which is good. It's good. But see, I don't think Dante's interested in presenting Catholic theology. That's what position I've come to. He's not trying to convince you or me of anything, except that we are human beings, gifted with reason, with which we can discern how to live our desires. Go and do it, he's saying. You've got everything you need. You've got hundreds and thousands of years of history, you've got a society, you were born into a family, you were born into a place, a time, culture, you've got a culture that you were born into. Okay, sort it out. Make sense of it for yourselves. You've got reason, you've got desire, and the heart of your existence as well. Now, that kind of proposal must be fascinating to anyone who's interested in themselves. Anyone who takes a serious interest in their own present and their own destiny must be fascinated by that, regardless of whatever particular set of beliefs they say they believe in or don't believe in. That kind of humanity is for everyone.
So his, the sins that he sees are his own view. They're not like the commandments or anything like that. Is it quite different?
No, it's not. He hasn't made it up. As far as people can tell, Dante had probably read every book that had ever been written. So he brings all the culture that was his together. So, for example, the structure of hell with the 9 levels is based on Aristotle. There's a place in Aristotle lists all the sins. The 7 deadly sins is based on the Old Testament. The structure of heaven is based on astronomy. But he never quite sticks
So he tweaks
to
it
the
because
script.
he changed it to suit the...
To suit his own understanding of human nature. So it's his, but he's brought. The book that I studied Dante was an Italian language textbook, and you'd have about 4 lines of Dante and 30 lines of notes. This bit comes from Aristotle. This bit comes from Zola. This bit. It's all of Western culture before then. It's in that book, but it's all filtered through his own understanding.
Dante, when he meet Paolo and Francesca, when he hear their story, he faint. It was the only time in his marvelous journeys he faint. Why is that?
Wow. Well, one aspect of the journey that I haven't spoken about is Beatrice, the woman that Dante met when he was 9 and when he was 18, and who died young. She was not his wife, but she seemed to be to him the kind of perfect embodiment of all the virtues. And the crisis that led him to end up in this dark forest at the beginning was probably in large part due to her and the fact that she died young, and that he went into a kind of what we would call, I suppose, depression after her, and spiritual crisis after her death. More than that, we don't know. But the fact that he faints in front of this story means that he's still working. He's got some stuff to work out.
How did the church at the time feel about the divine harmony? How did the church at the time feel about divine harmony?
The church had a great deal of difficulty with the comedy in the early years, and particularly because of the place of Muslims, for example, and other liberties that he took. Does anyone know? I don't think it was ever put on the index of forbidden books. I don't know about that. The church had a list of books that should not be read. I don't think it made it onto that. But it was never popular until probably the 20th century. Even the 19th century. Schools in Italy and seminaries would not encourage their students to read the Divine Comedy because of the liberties he takes, because it's far too exciting for tender young minds, and because he covers all of reality. He doesn't leave anything out. and his language leaves nothing out. So he writes, Dante is called the father of the Italian language because he wrote this masterpiece in his local dialect, basically. And Paradise has, and even Paolo Francesca, the most sublime Italian you've ever heard in your life. But in Lower Hell, he describes devils farting and other sorts of things that I don't need to go into. There's no aspect of human experience that he is afraid of looking in the face. We should say, though, that in 1921, the Pope, who I think was Benedict XV, wrote a letter about the Divine Comedy on the 700th benediction, urging Catholics to read it. And on March the 25th this year, Pope Francis wrote a letter, 100 years later, a beautiful letter, about the comedy, saying that all people should read Dante, because he says it reveals to us what it is to be human, which is interesting. It's very interesting that Francis will take that. Again, Francis has that kind of freedom that Dante had. You see. Pope Francis doesn't say that you should read Dante in order to become a good Catholic or even a good Christian, but to become a human. And that, I think, is what Dante is on about. And it's taken us a long time to get to acquire that kind of freedom to read it that way. We're going to be here all night, though. So.